The first day of 2019 Formula One testing is already in the books, and they say don't read too much into the times, but it's too late. We've already declared Sebastian Vettel world champion for this year, and I've got Scott Mitchell and Gary Anderson with me to discuss what we saw today and what we heard afterwards and what we've seen from looking into the numbers to work out what we can read into testing without getting too overexcited. Now, Scott, talking of excited, that felt a bit like the mood we saw at Ferrari afterwards. Some of the wording I saw from Vettel were, I think, as close as possible to perfect. He said things like very pleased, very happy. There was another one. I wrote it down. Unbelievable day. And the car made it straightforward for me and all these sort of things. You don't normally hear that on day one, even if someone's gone quickest, do you?
It feels like he's broken the unwritten rule of testing, which is if you've got a good car, don't reveal your hand straight away. But I think it's a sign of a significant shift within Ferrari. I mean, I know that we talked a lot about why they had to make their team principal change, Arriva Benet out, Mattia Binotto in. And last week at their launch, Binotto talked about making sure Ferrari got that joy back, that they had fun again in competing in F1. And Vettel mentioned that as well today. And he said, the last couple of months, I've seen people smiling at Maranello, and whether he meant that as a thinly veiled dig or not, it's easy. You don't have to just take it as Vettel sledging the previous guy. He's just recognising how much better it is in Ferrari at the moment, and the fact that it seemed to be followed up with a faultless first day, loads of mileage, a quick lap time as well, straight out of the box. No wonder the guy was jumping around for joy at the end of things.
Yeah, it's interesting because whenever he started running initially, I was down in the pit lane, and whenever he got into the 1 minute 20s, I saw a glint in the eyes of the guys on the pit wall and on the prop perch, as we call it, and I thought that's a bit strange. They're pretty pleased with that time. So I had a chat with one of the guys that I know at Ferrari, and he said that or a little bit later, and he said that the car is actually doing better than their predictions, their simulation predictions, as far as concerned. So they had a big high because of that, because that's a very important thing. If the correlation works out right and everything's all good, it's great. But if you can get that little bit extra out of it, if suddenly the car on the track is actually performing a little bit better, it's a big thing. And the motivation's everything, and within the team, it wasn't there before. It was this heavy shoulders, everywhere in the team. I think it was heavy shoulders. Even Vettel's shoulders were very heavy. So it's nice to see him with that bit of a lift in there. So the guys just sort of eyeing each other and smiling and being part of it, and that's good.
The point you make about basically doing better than your simulation suggests, it reminds me of was it last year, I think, on Autosport Plus we ran the big in-depth retro feature on the 2004 Ferrari, the car so good that it shocked Ferrari, and our colleague Adam Cooper spoke to all of the key players at the time, and it was amazing hearing what some of them would say about it. They said they'd come in from one of the runs at Imola and be like, this can't be real. We know
they thought they'd put the car together wrong. They thought they'd left the ballast out. They stripped it down overnight. And every time Schumacher came back from a run, he's saying, no, this is real performance. The car's actually doing this. And they're saying it can't be because the simulations don't tell us we're half a second quicker than last year, not 1.5.
Exactly. And should caveat, we're not saying that means that Vettel and Ferrari are going to have the championship wrapped up by Hungary or Belgium. Not in the slightest. But it's an indicator. That's the sort of thing. I think my point is that's the sort of era that we can compare this sort of feeling to within Ferrari, certainly. And it's amazing that we've got, I think, a situation where Ferrari's had the sort of day you would associate with Mercedes, to be honest. Bulletproof reliability, everyone singing each other's praises at the end of it, and a team that, as you say, Gary, just looks really, really happy.
Yeah, Gary, one of the things I thought that typified Ferrari's day, we saw the other big teams just getting on with their programme, pretty low profile. But in the morning, we saw short runs from Ferrari, and they went from the C2, which is one of the white-walled tyres, to the yellow C3 that's in the middle, a slightly quicker one. And it was all sort of 5 and 6 lap runs, and he'd go out and he'd do some quick laps, then he'd do another run that was very consistent, but a couple of attempts shy for, say, 5 or 6 laps at a time. Then he went quicker again. It was interesting, I thought, that a big team went and did that on the first morning. Did that surprise you?
Well, it is a surprise. I mean, if you take the overall picture, it just looks like they're well ahead of where you classify day one of the testing, pre-season testing as. It's like they've done a week's testing somewhere, maybe in Fiorano, but no, they wouldn't have done that, would they? But you never know. You know, they're definitely got well ahead of it, and they definitely have done a lot of simulation work. They've done a lot of their simulation, you know, the driver in the loop simulation. So they've really come into this season, I think, saying, right, we've learned by the mistakes of last year. We've learned by the mistakes of the year before. We now need to come in, and you need to be able to score big points all the time. You need to get away in the championship if you can at the beginning, to allow for perhaps those couple of little mistakes now and again. As you say, it's not a foregone conclusion that Ferrari are going to walk away with the big trophies, but they're going to give it a good shot. And it'll be interesting tomorrow because Charles Leclerc's driving the car for the first time as such. I mean, he's driven the Ferrari before, but the first time in the glitz and glamour of a Formula One season test, following up from Sebastian Vettel. So, you know, he's just a young kid on the block, and if he can do it with the car, then the car's got a good base underneath it. So that's an important day tomorrow for Ferrari.
Yeah, still lots to come in terms of working out exactly where everybody stands, but Ferrari have laid a marker, I think we can say. We'll run through some of the rest of the times behind. At one point, it looked like Vettel was going to end the day over a second clear of everybody else, but we had improvements from Sainz in the McLaren and Grosjean in the Haas towards the end. Sainz was on an even softer tyre than Vettel, so we maybe don't want to look into that too much at the moment, but McLaren will be happy with over 100 laps in the books. Then we had Max Verstappen, fourth, leading a clutch of cars in a 1 minute 19.4. We didn't really know what to expect from Red Bull Honda, but I guess the fact that they got a lot of laps in the bag after a slightly slow start, that's probably for day one is a big check for them, isn't it?
Well, actually, interestingly, you say a clutch of cars. They had a clutch problem. For a while, they had to sort of getting away from the garage was quite tricky up until lunchtime because they had to bring the car out and sort of set it up in the pit lane and let them sort of jam it into gear and away it would go sometimes.
In a dead straight line as well.
Yeah. No, dead straight line. Just shoot it at the end of the pit lane and see what happens. But yeah, they've got to be happy with it. The car looks good. I mean, the car looks like a Red Bull. We always see the Red Bull, and it's on the track. It's very nimble. It turns quickly. It's very sharp turning. They've got confidence in turning the car in very quickly, and the rear stays secure. So that's one thing that stands out a little bit on the Red Bull to the rest of the cars. It's I suppose you could say it's less lazy. So responsive, and they should be happy with their day. It's a good day for them. It's probably as good a day as they've had for a long time for the first day of pre-season testing. I mean, they've gone through some turmoil with new cars at the beginning of test for one thing or another, and the engine, the Renault engine, is that they were using, that had always had a few problems on day one, getting correlation with the dyno testing relative to the track testing. So, yeah, they're another top team, and I just hope that they can really take the battle to Mercedes or Ferrari. We're sitting here saying they're the big three. Hopefully, there's others coming in there as well. But from what we see, the big threes, they're pretty good teams, pretty strong teams, pretty focused teams, I suppose the best way of putting it. So I'd like to see Red Bull just notching up one and getting it right in amongst Ferrari and Mercedes.
Is that what this ultimately comes down to, Scott, with Red Bull? It's great to see some mileage, but you kind of charted the reinvigoration of Honda last year with Toro Rosso after the McLaren doldrums. With Red Bull, is it fundamentally about performance, which is obviously something we haven't quite seen yet?
I think so. I think one of the things that we do know that Honda made progress with last year was its ultimate performance. I think we saw that a couple of times, especially in the Japanese Grand Prix in qualifying, when Brendan Hartley qualified 6th, and that would have been Honda's home race. That would have been everything turned up to 11, and the performance was evidently very good. The problem that Honda's got is reliability. That's the question mark. So I've got no doubt actually that in over one lap that the Red Bull Honda, provided the car is good, that they'll be somewhere in the mix, and you'll probably see them a few tenths off of Mercedes and Ferrari, if that. My doubt is whether or not they can actually put together the sort of, when someone has like one of those 170 lap days and it includes a full race distance in the afternoon. That's the question mark for me, because I need to see concrete proof that the Honda, the reliability gains manifest themselves to the point where they can really start to sort of test the limits now in pre-season. That's the thing that they weren't able to do last year. Even though they made progress last year, it still got to the point where Honda evidently could not do 5, 6, 7 Grand Prix weekends with the same engine without any problems. And that is ultimately the big test that they need to pass if Red Bull's going to fight for World Championships.
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to add is the fact that, in the past, the Honda engine has always sounded very raspy or very harsh on overrun, and when you come and pick the throttle back up again. And that was something that was done because you can run, these are 6-cylinder engines, and you don't have to run all 6 cylinders all the time. So it's the way you bring the cylinders back into firing order, because it saves fuel whenever you're not firing the cylinders. But it doesn't sound like that anymore. So it's changed, and it did sound like that at the end of last year. So there's obviously a bit of a mental philosophy change there somewhere that may help them with the engine for the reliability problems. Because the more you're doing with all these things that's classified as trick, the more chance you have of tripping up. So the less you can do with them, the more you get out of them.
Yeah, let's move one place down the order to Kimi Raikkonen, moving, I guess, back to Alfa Romeo because it's effectively Sauber. He spun after 5 minutes of testing and brought out the first red flag, but was back underway not long after that and ended up having quite a good day, actually, from stepping down from Ferrari. So probably a good start for Kimi.
Yeah, I think he's one of these guys as well that's enjoying it, because I think he was probably the one at Ferrari with the politics and the pressures that isn't interested in all that stuff. And going back to Sauber, or as now Alfa Romeo, but Sauber's, it was in 2000 whenever he first started in Formula 1 19 years ago. He's back home as such. And it's a whole different pressure political situation. He's just there to drive a racing car, enjoy driving a racing car and go fast. I mean, he spun going out with cold tyres today. It was no big drama, but there was a few. He
wasn't the only one either.
No, there was 3 cars, I think, and Roman Grosjean was not very happy about the fact that the tyres when they're cold, it's impossible. But he's always moaning. But, it's lovely to see Kimi back in there. It'd be lovely to see him just enjoy the twilight of his career as such, because, right or wrong, that's where he is now. But he can still put in a performance, he can still do it. On a given day, he's a good race driver. So it would be nice to see him just get those couple of little opportunities where the lights all open up for him, and suddenly he's on his way, and he might could drag the Alfa onto a good podium position, which it's possible.
One of the things that Kimi said at the end of the day, apart from joking about his spin, which he put down to maybe we never really learn from driving in the winter when it's really cold, it was. I think you'd probably classify it as a mixed day if you were Alfa Romeo, because I don't know many teams that start the day in the gravel, end the day causing a red flag, but still rack up more than 100 laps.
We're sat here saying they're quite a good day.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of a bit weird. But Kimi said that the way that he's sort of just, I guess, acclimatised to life at Alfa Romeo, or Sauber as it was when he signed, it's eradicated a bit of doubt. I think not necessarily in whether the move was the right one for him, because I think we saw in the second half of last year that he opened up, he relaxed, he just looked happier. Like, this is coming to an end now. All this politics, all this spotlight, it's coming to the end. I'm gonna go somewhere and just do what I'm in F1 to do, which is drive. And I think the doubt was, how quickly will I be able to do that? How quickly will I fit into this new team? How quickly will I get used to the way they work? How quickly will they get used to me? And from what it sounds like he's there already. And he said that the car's a big step from what he drove at the end of last year. And remember, that was a car that was qualifying and finishing in the top 10. So if Kimi says that's made a big step, obviously he didn't drive that car here in Barcelona in pre-season testing in 2018, and that was a bit of a dog at times. That was very, very tail happy. I think Marcus Ericsson and Charles Leclerc weren't particularly pleased with what they had. But that car was massively improved by the end of the season. And Kimi's saying it's even better now. So, okay, we didn't maybe get the complete overhaul of the look of the car that we were hoping for, colour scheme-wise, with Alfa's big return. But it looks like, touch wood, this version of Alfa is going to be a bit more competitive than the one I think that F1 saw 34 years ago now.
Yeah, and that would be great for F1 as well. We'll rattle through some of the next drivers that we had. Daniel Kvyat was back in action and was sick for Toro Rosso. Sergio Perez 7th in the Racing Point. Only 30 laps for them today on the first day that we've seen that car in action. I'm sure that's one we'll come back to. But at the bottom of the times, we had the 2 teams that split their drivers through the day. So we had the 2 Mercedes drivers, Bottas and Hamilton, both did a 20.1 on the C2 tyre. And behind them, we had the 2 Renault drivers, Hülkenberg and Ricciardo, who both did 20.9s on the C2 tyres. Gary, if we've got these big teams that we're expecting quite a lot from, it's not necessarily concerning that they're at the bottom of the times. Is there anything we can read into the fact that both drivers for both teams did exactly the same times? Does that just mean they had a very conservative program today?
No, I don't think so. I think to be honest, it shows that the team and the car and its preparation for a given racetrack is now actually more important than the driver. There's not a lot left for the driver to get in the car and wring its neck. You could see back in the old days of Prost and Senna and Mansell and all those guys, Piquet, the driver made a much, much bigger difference because all this data stuff didn't exist. It was all done by the driver at the race meeting with his engineer as such. And that's been lost really, which is a bit sad. Obviously they're going through their programs, but for the two drivers to end up, within, as I say, hundredths of a second of each other, I think it just shows that the car is where the car is, and that's it. And the driver can't make up for much now. When it comes to qualifying, at a race meeting, it's slightly different because the pressures are different, and it's about putting that lap in at that time. Whereas today, all those drivers are doing quite a few laps, so they have opportunities to do a reasonable job. Whereas qualifying is about that one lap special, and that's where we saw last year Lewis Hamilton was phenomenal at doing that. Whereas others would just make that little bit more of an error and not have another lap to do it. So it does change a bit, but whenever it comes to, as I say, going round and round at a racetrack at Barcelona, then the car becomes the more important part of the jigsaw.